Standing at 6'3" and weighing 225 pounds, with brown eyes and brown hair, Timothy Staples was an imposing figure. But don't let his size mislead you. He was not one to bully others. He exhibited a warm and friendly demeanor and was a beloved teacher at Damien High School in Laverne, where he taught social science and English. At Damien, he was at home, as he had graduated from there 13 years earlier. At the age of 32, he had recently married his sweetheart, Katie. Tim, as he was called, loved the outdoors, and he combined this love with his passion to help people by becoming a volunteer search and rescuer. For the preceding 9 years, he was a member of West Valley Search and Rescue. Search and rescue is no easy task. It involves years of arduous training and retraining. Over the years, he served on numerous search missions, including missions where he operated in extreme alpine conditions. This story provides the details of Tim's death on his final search mission. These stories aren't just stories. I include certain details for the purpose of educating the listener. In this program, I will describe a technique of mountaineering to show how mountaineering is different than hiking. This channel is about hiking, not mountaineering. What is important for the hiker is to be able to distinguish between hiking conditions and mountaineering conditions. In hiking conditions, you hike. In mountaineering conditions, you mountaineer. You don't hike in mountaineering conditions. I will cover this distinction in more detail shortly. Srinivas Makapati, otherwise known as Shri, went missing on Mount Baldy on Sunday, December 8, 2019. He was last seen ascending the old Mount Baldy Trail. In a search operation, the search starts on the route where the missing hiker is known to have traveled, and, if it is unsuccessful, the search expands to adjacent areas. Authorities conducted search operations daily for the next 5 weekdays, utilizing the searchers who were available without success. Saturday, December 14th, was the first weekend day after Shri went missing. Being the weekend meant that more search and rescue personnel were available. On that day, 126 search and rescue personnel from numerous rescue organizations were involved in the search. Tim was one of them. He was assigned as leader of a 2-man search team. Tim and his search partner were tasked with searching a couloir, an ice chute, north of Mount Harwood. They left the command post at approximately 9 a.m. and took the Baldy Resort chairlift to the Devil's Backbone Trail. From there, they hiked about 1 mile up the trail to the top of Mount Harwood and located the couloir they were assigned to search. Mount Harwood is a small peak that rises on the ridge east of Mount Baldy's summit. To its south is the Devil's Backbone Trail. North of it are 4 couloirs. Couloir is a French word that refers to a steep, narrow mountain gorge. During the day, the sun can partially melt the snow in the couloir. Then at night, this melted snow can freeze over to form an ice chute. The pair were assigned to search the first frozen couloir. You may wonder why they would want to search north of Mount Harwood when the main trail is south of the peak. There is another trail that crosses over the top of Mount Harwood, which the missing hiker could have taken. Conceivably, he could have fallen down any one of the couloirs. This picture shows Mount Harwood across from Baldy Bull Trail, and this is what Mount Harwood looks like when descending the east ridge from Mount Baldy summit. Note the Devil's Backbone Trail to its right. The couloirs are to its left. This is a picture of the first couloir near its top. Notice that it is steep. At the time I took this picture, wind was blowing over the ridge from the southwest at about 25 miles per hour, with gusts up to 35 miles per hour. The gusting wind felt like it was trying to push me off the ridge into the couloir. Mountain hiking and mountaineering are distinctly different. Mountain hiking includes hiking on mountain trails, but also includes crossing patches of snow or ice using microspikes and trekking poles. Mountaineering is a process of summiting mountains in more difficult conditions. This may involve traversing steep packed snow or ice. Mountaineering requires mountaineering equipment, which includes a helmet, an ice axe, mountaineering boots, and crampons. Crampons are a footwear traction device attached to your boots that have claw-like metal spikes over an inch long on the bottom and front. Mountain hiking is a two-step cycle. You move foot 1, foot 2, foot 1, foot 2 in a continuous cycle as you simultaneously move your trekking poles. In mountaineering, the general principle is to maintain 2 points of contact at all times. This is accomplished through a 3-step cycle. You move the ice axe, foot 1, foot 2, ice axe, foot 1, foot 2 in a continuous cycle. It's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. This 3-step cycle takes some getting used to. Descending an ice chute, as our 2 searchers were doing, requires additional effort. When you advance your ice axe, you slam its spike deep into the ice, deep enough to support your weight if you slip. When you advance your foot, you force it downward, making certain your crampon spikes break through the ice, deep enough to hold. Moving requires your total attention. You block out any distractions. You do not look around while you are moving. Instead, you stop and make sure your feet and ice axe are firmly planted in a tripod stance before directing your attention elsewhere. This process is mentally and physically fatiguing. Practiced correctly, it should keep you from falling. The team started its search at the top of the chute. Tim searched the west side of the chute. His search partner searched the east side. Each traversed back and forth on his respective side as they descended, looking for the missing hiker. They kept in voice and visual contact as they searched. However, visual contact was intermittently interrupted if one of them passed behind a rock or a tree. Tim moved faster down the chute than his partner. At one point, his partner saw him standing on a rock outcropping in the center of the chute at the 9,100-foot elevation level. His partner then turned his attention to descending the chute. When he reached the level where he last saw Tim, he stopped and looked for him, but he did not see him. He called his name. Tim didn't answer. He tried using his radio to call Tim and other rescuers. Still no answer. He started to move toward the rock outcropping and glimpsed some movement down the ice chute. It lasted a fraction of a second and was gone. He thought the movement was Tim hiking down. Only later did he realize it was probably Tim sliding. He again started to move toward the rock outcropping when he realized the slope was too steep and too icy to go straight across. He had to go either up or down. Since he thought Tim may have hiked down, he decided to go down. He continued to call for Tim by voice and used his radio in attempts to contact Tim and other rescuers. He received no replies. After descending 300 vertical feet, he spotted a picket standing vertically on the ice, its point embedded a half-inch into the ice. He noticed the picket's attached runner was still wrapped around its top, like it would have been if it was on a backpack. It looked oddly out of place. In retrospect, he thinks the picket fell out of Tim's backpack during his fall. Still unsure of what happened to Tim, he checked to see if his cell phone had reception. It did. He called the command post and told them that he could not find Tim. The command post sent a team to the top of the ice chute to establish ground radio communication with him, and they diverted LA County Sheriff Helicopter Air Rescue 5 to his location. The helicopter was already participating in the search for the missing hiker, putting it nearby. He established radio communication with the helicopter and explained to the crew that Tim was missing. He waited while the helicopter crew searched for Tim. After they located Tim, they asked him if he could hike down the ice chute to where the helicopter had been hovering. There they could evacuate him. He said he would try, so he continued his journey down the ice chute. At approximately 8,700 feet elevation, he found a single glove. 100 feet lower, at about 8,600 feet elevation, he saw a slide impression. This consisted of 2 drag impression lines going down the ice chute, each 5 feet long, about 6 feet apart. He thought the lines could have been caused by an ice axe and crampons. If this was the case, Tim may have been sliding down sideways. As to the start point of Tim's fall, his search partner believes he probably slipped and fell shortly after climbing down the rock outcropping in the center of the ice chute. This was at approximately 9,100 feet elevation. The time when he lost contact with Tim was 1 p.m. Air Rescue 5 arrived over the ice chute and made sight and radio contact with Tim's search partner. From him, they learned about Tim's disappearance. They began their search. High winds over the ridgeline and swirling winds below the ridge prevented the helicopter from hovering near Tim's search partner. The helicopter pilot had to search by flying up the couloir as spotters inside the copter looked for Tim. After about 10 passes, a spotter noticed what looked like a helmet next to a rock section that was covered in ice. It took approximately 10 more passes before they regained visual contact with the item. At that location, the helicopter was far enough down the couloir that it was away from the swirling winds, and it was able to hover. At 2:25 p.m., approximately 1 hour 25 minutes after Tim went missing, Air Rescue 5 lowered a crew member down to the location. He found Tim. Tim's feet were above his head, his body folded with his head facing downhill. Tim showed no signs of life, no body movement, his wounds were not bleeding, no breathing, no pulse. His legs were cool and hard to the touch. What was thought to have been his helmet from the air was actually Tim's shirt pulled over his head. Tim's body had massive head and chest trauma. Leading uphill from Tim's body was a blood trail, which, when followed, ascended about 100 feet to a large rock with an expansive area of blood covering it. Tim appeared to have slid face first into the rock before continuing downhill. Tim's backpack and water bottle were located about 300 feet downhill from his body. Air Rescue 5 hoisted Tim's body off the mountain at 3 p.m. and flew it to Apple Valley Airport. It returned to the mountain an hour and 15 minutes later to hoist Tim's search partner off the ice chute. By that time, he had hiked down to the 8,500-foot elevation level where the helicopter could hover. The information in this section came from the coroner's investigation report and from Tim's search partner, who provided me with details that were not included in the report. Tim's search partner, the only witness to this incident, thinks Tim fell after descending the rocks in the center of the chute at 9,100 feet elevation. Tim's body was located at about 7,700 feet elevation with known GPS coordinates. The picket was at 8,835 feet elevation with known GPS coordinates. The single glove was at about 8,700 feet elevation. The slide impression was at about 8,600 feet elevation. Tim's backpack and water bottle were approximately 300 feet downhill from the body. I do not know the GPS coordinates of the rock Tim collided with, but this rock outcropping is a good candidate. Using the estimated fall start point and the known fall end point, the vertical fall distance is approximately 1,400 feet. I use Google's Measure Distance tool to plot a horizontal distance of about 2,500 feet. To calculate the approximate total fall distance, I use the vertical and horizontal distances as the sides of a right triangle and calculated the hypotenuse. This gives us a total fall distance of approximately 2,865 feet. Let's compare my calculation with what was written in the coroner's investigation report. On pages 1 and 3 of the report, it states that Tim's body was 300 feet below the trail. On page 8, it states that it was 1,200 feet along the ice chute. The coroner's autopsy report states that Tim was 300 feet below the trail. You saw how I estimated the distances. How did the coroner's investigator estimate fall distance? The 1,200 feet distance came from the helicopter crew, who eyeballed it. What about the statement 300 feet below the trail? What is that supposed to mean? Most hiking falls occur from the trail or near the trail, which is why the trail is usually used as a reference to calculate fall distances. In my previous program, I used the trail as a reference to calculate fall distances in my first 2 cases. In Tim's case, using the trail as a reference point made no sense. The investigator knew that Tim was searching off trail when he fell. Since he didn't fall from the trail, There is no need to mention the trail. Then there is the fact that the nearest trail above the body was over 3,000 feet away, not 300 feet. With the inaccurate numbers, the coroner's investigator and the coroner medical examiner did not appreciate the magnitude of the fall. I found another error in the report. The report indicated the picket and glove were found at the same location, and the slide impression was nearby. This initially led me to surmise that Tim had removed one glove and was in the process of placing the picket when he fell. That would make the start of the fall at this location. My interview with Tim's search partner provided a different picture. Tim fell from a point 300 vertical feet above the picket, and the picket, glove, and slide impression were found at different elevations. What actually happened was the picket and glove were displaced from his backpack during the fall. Although the report is inaccurate in these areas, the errors are minor and had no effect on the conclusions of the coroner's report. The medical examiner found lacerations on the right front, side, and back areas of the scalp and on the right side of the pelvis. He found contusions in these areas and abrasions over the face, right back, and on the back side of the arms and legs. He found diffuse scalp hemorrhage in the subgaleal area. He found bleeding in the subarachnoid area. The arachnoid mater covers the outside of the brain. It's like a plastic wrap that surrounds the brain. As you can see in this picture, blood vessels course their way beneath the arachnoid mater to nourish the brain substance. Trauma can disrupt the blood vessels, causing bleeding beneath the arachnoid. This brain specimen does not show bleeding. Tim's brain showed blood in the subarachnoid areas of most of his brain. This indicates that he sustained traumatic brain injury. He found multiple skull fractures of the frontal bone extending into the orbital plates and fractures of the sphenoid bone. Skull fractures are indicative of traumatic brain injury as well. It is worth mentioning that the list of recovered items did not include Tim's helmet. He apparently lost it during his fall before he struck the rock. He found a posterior atlanto-occipital dislocation with no obvious damage to the spinal cord. What does this mean? Atlanto refers to the atlas bone, which is the first cervical vertebra. Occipital is the occipital bone of the skull. It forms the back and bottom of the skull. It has a hole in it where the spinal cord exits the skull as it passes into the vertebra of the cervical spine. The occipital bone sits on top of the atlas bone. Based upon his injuries, we know Tim slammed into the rock, face first, with his neck extended. When he hit the rock, his forehead contacted the rock first, fracturing his frontal and sphenoid bones. This stopped the forward movement of the skull. The rest of the body kept moving forward. His extended neck created a shear plane between the occipital bone and the atlas bone. His continued body movement tore through the tough, fibrous ligaments connecting the atlas bone to the occipital bone, and the atlas slid forward relative to the skull. Since the occipital bone is posterior relative to the atlas bone, this is called a posterior atlanto-occipital dislocation. This dislocation can injure individual nerves, and, if the movement is great enough, it can slice into the spinal cord. In Tim's case, it did not appear to injure the spinal cord. However, you do not need to sustain spinal cord injury for this condition to kill. When atlanto-occipital dislocation was associated with traumatic brain injury, as was the case with Tim, the incidence of death increased by a factor of 8. In other words, Tim's head and neck injuries, in and of themselves, could have killed him. He found prevertebral fascial hemorrhages in the 6th and 7th cervical vertebra area. He found fractures of both clavicles. The first 4 ribs had 3 fractures each. The right 5th and 6th ribs each had anterior fractures. The left 1st to 7th ribs had posterior rib fractures, and the left 2nd to 8th ribs had lateral rib fractures. Broken ribs have sharp edges that can puncture the lungs, and multiple small lung lacerations, up to a ½ inch long, were found in both lungs. These lacerations can cause air to escape the lungs into the chest cavity, causing the lungs to partially or fully collapse. The report did not specify the extent of lung collapse, but I would expect at least some. Multiple contusions were found in both lungs from external trauma. The fractured bones bled, and he found 250 cc's of blood in the right pleural space and 200 cc's of blood in the left pleural space. There was a partial laceration of the descending aorta just distal to the left subclavian artery. A partial tear oozes blood. A complete tear would spurt blood. The mediastinal soft tissues contain hemorrhage. There was a small fracture of his right pubic ramus. Tim's drug screen done at autopsy was completely negative, as you would expect. The coroner's stated cause of death was blunt force injury of the head and chest. His manner of death was an accident. At the time of his fatal fall, Tim was searching for the missing hiker Sri Makapati. Those of you who watched my previous program may have already recognized the similarities in the ways both Tim and Sri died. Both took a long fall down an ice chute head first. Both struck a rock or tree with their head and sustained severe head trauma. I'm curious, how far away were they from each other when they died? Using the GPS coordinates of their remains and Google Maps, they were 1.58 miles apart. After Tim's death, authorities stopped their search for Sri. This brings to the forefront the priorities of a rescuer. His first priority is not the victim, it is himself. The rescuer should not become another victim. His second priority is his teammates. Search and rescue teammates should not become additional victims. His third priority is the victim. Hikers and their families need to understand that authorities will not deploy search and rescue personnel into the field if conditions are too dangerous. In early 2024, authorities added this sign to a number of signposts in Mount Baldy and Icehouse Canyon areas. Let's take a closer look at it. It says, rescue may be difficult or impossible. What this is telling you is that rescue is not guaranteed. Remember the priorities of a rescuer. After this, the sign says, be prepared to spend the night in an emergency, and you are responsible for your own safety. Like the rescuer, your first priority is to take care of yourself. If you get into trouble, your first thought should be self-rescue. At the bottom of the sign, it says, keep rescuers out of danger. I suspect the person who wrote this sign was thinking of Tim when he wrote it. Now, when you read this sign, you can remember Tim too. This is the Hiking Doc reminding you to keep yourselves safe.